Have you looked online for speaker stands but have been unable to find something that fits your needs? Do you have big speakers but don't trust them on flimsy or wobbly stands that are easy to knock over? Have you found a stand that does fit your speakers but it's too expensive to justify? Hey everyone, my name's Robert and today we'll be going through the step-by-step process of building your very own speaker stands. These stands can be custom made to fit your needs and they're designed to provide sturdy support for your speakers while also enhancing the overall look of your studio or living space. By the end of this video, you'll have a pair of stylish and functional speaker stands that you can proudly display. This video is brought to you by DistroKid, your one-stop shop for music distribution services. Let's get started by going over the materials and tools needed for this project. You'll want to gather two 2-foot by 4-foot sheets of 3/4 inch MDF, along with two 6-foot pieces of 1-inch by 8-inch select pine and two 6-foot pieces of 1-inch by 10-inch select pine. This will be all the wood needed for the project, and I got it cut to size at the hardware store. The MDF pieces will need to be cut in thirds into 16-inch by 24-inch pieces. It'll make 6 pieces in total, so you'll have 2 extra pieces. The wood will be cut in half into 2 3-foot sections. Now a quick note about the length of the wood because you may want your stands to vary from mine. The select pine wood is going to be used to construct the box frame column that makes up the height of these stands. If you're going to build custom speaker stands for a listening position, begin by sitting in position and measure the height of your ear from the ground. This is where you want your tweeters to be pointed. You'll build your speaker stand height accordingly. This build is custom to my ear height of 49 inches with the assumption that I'm going to be placing my speakers on these isoacoustic pads, which will also add some height. You can adjust the length of the wood and thus the height of these stands to fit your unique listening position. Additionally, you'll need a box of 100 2-inch construction screws. I ended up using 64. You'll also need 8 rubber feet with screws under a 1/2 inch long, and a can of primer and wood paint. I'll be using flat black. Don't forget the wood glue, wood filler, and the essential tools like a drill bits, countersink, finishing sander, putty knife, a pencil, painter's tape, a level, a measuring tape, and a painting kit. You're also going to need a bunch of sand or sand bags. The amount will depend on the volume of your frame's cavity. But I'll be using 4 bags of traction sand and 1 bag of play sand. Now that you have all your materials and tools ready, it's time to start assembling the main box frame column structure for your speaker stands. Begin by fitting together the wood pieces according to the dimensions outlined in our plans. We know that to secure the top and bottom plate, the screws are going to go in through the ends of these boards. So we'll place a screw at the end for a rough reference, and we'll draw out a line out of reach of this screw's path. You'll want to repeat this for each corner on the wide 10-inch piece. The 1-inch boards are actually 3/4 of an inch thick, so measure the halfway point to make sure that your screws are centered into the board. Then make 2 more markings along the middle of the 10-inch board. There should be 8 markings total for this board, 4 for each side. Use a thin drill bit and drill pilot holes at each of the 8 markings. Then use a 1/2 inch countersink to create a recess in each hole for the screw to sit flush with the wood. Go slowly and check your hole against the size of the screw head to make sure it's a perfect fit. Then squeeze out a small bead of wood glue and spread it even with your finger. Carefully align the pieces together and begin by screwing in the corners. You may need a second set of hands for this step because it can be a bit awkward until the first few pieces are connected. Wipe off any excess glue on the outside of the box frame. Then check to make sure that you have a good, consistent bead of glue on the inside of the frame. Towards the end of this build, you're going to need to fill this frame with sand or sand bags. So you're going to want to make sure that you have a good seal so you don't get sand leaking all over your studio. These stands are going to be a centerpiece in my studio for a while. I'm going to be looking at them every day and bringing clients in, so I want to go the extra mile to make sure there's something special. just like you want your music to be presented with the best possible first impression for your listener. And that's why DistroKid created the Spotify Canvas generator to make your Spotify release stand out and increase audience retention. Spotify claims a high-quality canvas can increase streams by up to 120%. This is likely increasing listen time to reach the 30-second threshold of what Spotify considers a stream. It also claims to increase the amount of saves by up to 114%. So if you want people who come across your music to listen longer and to save it to listen again later, you can use the Spotify Canvas generator, available free for all DistroKid artists. DistroKid makes music distribution fun and easy with unlimited uploads, and artists keep 100% of their royalties and earnings. Over 1 million artists rely on DistroKid to get their music onto Spotify, Apple Music, and all other major streaming services. So if you haven't already, you can use the link in the description to get 7% off your first year's subscription with DistroKid. Repeat the process on the other side, but this time you'll need to glue both sides at once, so make sure you've got everything pre-measured, drilled, and ready to go. As you carefully assemble the box frame, do your best to ensure that all edges are flush and the corners are square. If the wood is warped in some way, you may need an extra set of hands to hold the boards in place while you screw them together. Finally, wipe off any excess glue on the outside and make sure you have a solid bead of wood glue on each of the inside seams. Take your time with this step to ensure a sealed, stable, and secure foundation for your stands. Now, before moving on, give each of the screws a final twist with a screwdriver to make sure that they are fully seated. With the box assembled, it's time to move on to filling holes and sanding them down to ensure a smooth and flawless finish. But first, a quick showcase of the newly assembled box frame and a sneak peek of where we're headed with the end product. With the box assembled, it's time to move on to filling holes and sanding them down to ensure a smooth and flawless finish. Begin by applying wood filler to any gaps, cracks, or imperfections in the surface of the box frame. Use a putty knife to spread the filler evenly and allow it to dry completely. This will fill any holes left from the screws, as well as nicks in the wood or crevices found in knots or other imperfections in the wood. In this brief time lapse, you can see each of the screw holes covered in a layer of wood filler. Spread on as much as you need in order to cover the holes, and once the filler is dry, use a sander to sand down the entire surface of the box. This will remove any excess filler, but it's also going to create a smooth, uniform finish. Again, take your time with this step, especially along the seams if you want to get professional looking results. I started with about 100 grit to even out the edges, and then went up to 120 to smooth out the rest of the wood filler. Later on, we'll use a finer grit after priming. But right now, there's some more heavy-duty sanding in your immediate future, because next we'll focus on rounding the MDF corners to give our speaker stands a sleek and clean appearance. For this, I used something circular like a cup as a guide and traced around it on each corner. This would give me a circular reference, and while I didn't end up going all the way with it, I did find something close that fit the rounded rectangle shape that I was going for. The rounded edges give it a really clean and stylish look and are less likely to catch on things in your studio. You're free to shape these however you want, but I found the round corners turned out very well. But maybe I needed to use a coarser grain, like 80 or something, for the sandpaper, because man, this was a lot of work, but I truly think that it was worth it. Before we move on to painting, it's essential to prime the edges of the MDF to ensure a smooth and durable finish. Using a paint roller, apply a coat of primer to the edges of your MDF sheets. This will create a sealed surface that will help the paint adhere evenly and prevent any moisture damage over time. Allow the primer to dry for an hour or two, and then use a fine grit sandpaper, something like 150, to sand down the primed surfaces of the MDF. This will smooth out any rough spots or imperfections and provide a clean and even surface for painting. Be sure to sand lightly and avoid removing too much of the primer. With the edges primed, it's time to prime the entire surface of the box. So using a paint roller, apply a coat of primer to the entire exterior of the box, ensuring an even coverage. This will provide a solid base for the paint and help seal the wood surface. So just like the MDF, allow the primer to dry for an hour or two, and then do a quick sand, prime again, and sand again. Not only is this going to make your stand super smooth, it's going to make a great base for your paint, which will ensure a much more even color, and it will hide any knots or imperfections in the wood, especially if you chose to go with a lighter color instead of black. It is incredibly tedious, but I assure you, you will be satisfied with the results. Now that your primer is dry, it's time to measure and drill guide holes in the MDF for assembly. By now, you should have decided which pieces of MDF are destined to be tops and which are going to be bottoms. Begin by placing the box centered on the top of the bottom plate. Use a measuring tape to make sure it's as centered as possible, and then trace around it with a pencil. Measure out the thickness of the boards used for the box so that you can make your mark and pilot holes in the center of the board. Once your edges are marked, you can mark out where your pilot holes will be drilled. I'll be doing each corner, one in the middle of the short side, and 2 spread across the middle of the long side for 12 in total. Next, using a thin drill bit, carefully drill guide holes in the corners of the marked area in the center of the MDF. Drill another hole in the center of each short side and 2 along the long side. There should be 12 holes forming a rectangle in the center. On the bottom side of the top plate, we can measure out and drill pilot holes for each of the 4 corners of our top plate. After drilling the guide holes, it's essential to countersink them to ensure that the screws sit flush with the surface of the MDF. This will create a seamless finish and prevent any protruding screws. Then, flip the bottom plate over to the bottom side and use a countersink to create the same recessed holes for each of the screws in the central rectangle. Keep countersinking until you can fit the head of your screw in the hole. This will ensure that your screws will sit flush with the surface of the MDF and create a seamless finish. Finally, while you're still on the bottom side of the bottom plate, carefully drill guide holes 2 inches in from each of the corners on the MDF. Now, you do not want these holes to go all the way through, so measure about half the depth of the MDF and mark that on your drill bit with a felt pen. Then drill down only to this point. These will be used for the rubber foot pads we put in later on. Now that all the guide holes are drilled and countersunk, it's time to prime the surfaces of the MDF sheets. Using a paint roller or brush, apply a coat of primer to the entire surface of each MDF sheet, including the edges. This will provide a sealed surface for the paint and help to prevent the MDF from moisture and other damage. I ended up doing 2 coats of primer and sanding after each coat. It was quite tedious, but I'm incredibly happy with the results. It was very smooth and had a very even color distribution. You can prime all around the MDF, but make sure to leave a naked section where the box frame will connect to the bottom plate. You're going to be using wood glue there, and it will adhere best if it's not primed or painted. You can tape this before you paint, or you can just YOLO it like I did. Finally, one more pass with some 150 grit sandpaper once your primer is dry and you are ready for painting. I'll be using a flat black wood paint. Black so my stands match my studio space, and flat so that they don't reflect light, which is a bonus for when I'm filming, but that does mean that dirt, the oil from your hands, and other sorts of detritus are going to show up more easily. Apply a coat of paint to the entire surface of each MDF sheet, including the edges. Now, I was gonna leave a bare spot on the bottom side of the top plate because it's gonna end up being on the inside, you won't see it, but I got curious to see if it would end up looking different from the primed sections. So I primed the whole thing in a little experiment, and we'll find out if the primer creates a more even finish on the MDF once 2 coats have dried. Initially, it did look a little bit different. It had a much more even color, but that could just be the primer poking through the rest of the MDF. Just like before, go for broad strokes and even coverage. And remember to avoid getting paint on the rectangular area that your box frame will be attached to. When painting the box frame, make sure to only paint the exterior faces to avoid getting paint on the ends that will contact the top and bottom plates. This will ensure the best contact, especially against the bottom plate where wood glue will be used. Allow the paint to dry completely before applying another coat to the other side of the MDF. Use even strokes and overlapping motions to ensure full coverage and a consistent finish. Once the paint has dried, apply a second coat to the box and the MDF plates. The MDF did look quite uneven after the first coat, but looked much smoother after the second coat. With the painting complete, it's time to assemble your speaker stands. Start by flipping the box upside down, line up the bottom plate, and begin drilling your pilot holes. Make sure your bottom plate is as centered as possible, and check that you can feel wood with your bit before drilling down. Once your guide holes have been drilled, squeeze out your wood glue around the edge of the box frame and spread it flat with your finger. Then drive the screws into the pre-drilled guide holes to secure the pieces together. I found it best to start at one corner and then go to the opposite corner, then do the other corners, and finally the rest. Of course. Of course. Make sure to wipe up any excess glue that may have dripped out while securing the pieces together. And then go around the outside edge of the joint one more time with some wood glue to make sure you've got a good seal. Once the bottom piece is attached, you can install the rubber feet on the bottom of your speaker stands. These feet will provide stability and prevent the stands from sliding or scratching the floor. And they're also a method of decoupling the speaker stand from the floor to minimize vibrational transfer. Feed the screw through the rubber ring and screw the feet into the pre-drilled holes on the bottom of the stands, making sure that they're tight and secure. Repeat for each corner of the bottom plate. With the bottom plate and the rubber feet installed, flip the stand over again and use a level to ensure that the top of the box frame is level. Adjust the level as needed with some folded up cardboard and tape it to the inside of the frame. This will ensure that your speakers sit securely on the stands and provide a perfectly level surface for optimal sound quality. Now, a quick note here, before you put the top plate on and you put these in your studio and you put your speakers on them, you're going to need to get some sandbags to fill this box for a few reasons. First, to add weight and stability to the speaker stands. Second, to minimize resonance and dampen vibrations within the stand. And by doing so, the sand-filled stands can actually improve the clarity and accuracy of sound reproduction, particularly in the lower frequencies. Now, I would recommend doing this step in your studio once your stands are all finished and you've got them in position, because they are going to be really heavy and almost impossible to move. But to just show you here, you're going to fill the stands with sandbags. Here I'm using bags of traction sand that I bought at a gas station because they fit perfectly. Now try and balance them the best that you can for stability, and when I do this for real in my studio, I'll fill this top cavity here with a sealed bag of play sand from the hardware store. This will help to maximize the effectiveness of your stands and prevent them from tipping or wobbling to ensure that your speakers remain secure during use. Once you're 100% happy with the finish, and you've got your stand in your studio and your sand is in, you're ready to join the top piece of the box to the assembled bottom pieces. So just like before, position the top piece carefully and drill your pilot holes and sink your construction screws to secure the pieces together. Now your speaker stands are ready for use. So with your speaker stands fully assembled, let's take a moment to showcase your handiwork. This has been quite an in-depth project and I'm pretty happy with the results. How about you? If you made it through, congratulations. This was a lot of hard work and you should feel proud of your efforts. Make sure to carefully inspect your stands for any imperfections or areas that may require additional attention. Next, we'll talk about what to do if you happen to have any splits, imperfections, or exposed wood poking through. So first, get some wood glue to fill any gaps or cracks in the joints and then wipe it down. Once dry, sand down any rough spots or excess glue. This will give you a flat surface that you can touch up with paint for a more even finish. Now this step can make a real difference. The first stand, the one that I filmed, went pretty smoothly, but on this other one, I must have been off on the placement of the bottom plate because I was just fighting to get the last 4 screws in without splitting the wood. But after gluing and sanding and repainting, you'd be hard pressed to find which side had the splits. You can also take this time to go over the MDF edges and the top plate where your speakers will sit. You can also give the screws a little bit of paint to help them blend in with the top. The primed MDF was quite uneven after the first coat, but it looked much smoother after a second coat. The box frame also looked incredibly sharp. The primer really hid all of the knots and variations in the wood, and I swear these almost looked like cast aluminum when I set them up, almost like a music stand. It was very, very cool. And here they are again with the shock absorbers that your speakers will inevitably rest upon. A great fit with plenty of space. You've worked really hard to put your studio together, and with these custom built stands, your speakers will have a pedestal to look and sound great on. The total cost of these 2 stands was 288 Canadian dollars or 210 American dollars. That's 144 Canadian dollars or 105 American dollars each, which I'll admit is still a bit of an investment, but I think it's worth it for the stability and the security of speakers this size. I really couldn't find anything on the market that wasn't over 300 Canadian dollars each, and this way you can custom build the stand to your unique listening position. So if you enjoyed this build, or you built these yourself, leave a comment below. Hopefully this was helpful in giving you some pride in custom making your own studio furniture. If you found this video valuable, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you won't miss more videos like this one. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoy your new speaker stands and the advanced audio experience they provide. Thank you for watching and happy listening.
I need some patience.